Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a little bit of breakdown on every team in the Big 12, and now it's time to make some predictions. And I have gotten some very funny comments, I'll be honest, over the last couple of days. And to be honest, over the last couple of days, I've realized I will never get mad at anyone for picking anything in any conference because this is really hard to figure out how these conferences are going to go, especially the ACC yesterday. I'm already rethinking about 10 different decisions I made in that one, but at the end of the day, I'm going to roll with my guns, and then at the end of the year, you guys are more than welcome to make fun of me. But let's get into the Big 12 here and let's break down my predictions. And this is going to be a weird conference. There's going to be a ton of teams at the top that are going to make it really, really tough to figure out who is the best team in this conference at the end of the day. There are so many teams that will have plenty to say, all the way down there to 7. I think are going to be teams that are going to be in it in November, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare, and figuring it out is going to be absolutely crazy. But I do have Iowa State and Kansas State finding their way to Arlington. I think these two teams, kind of for different reasons, are really, really remarkable teams. When I look at Kansas State, I just see an explosivity that I don't see in other teams. I think they are a team that absolutely can do just about everything you want them to do on the football field. Adding someone like Dylan Edwards helps that a ton. There's no two ways about that. I think J.C. Brown on the outside is going to be a really good player. And then that defensive side of the ball is really solid. Braden Mott is someone that I really think is going to be an awesome player this year. Desmond Purnell holding it down the middle of that defense is huge. And then Jacob Parrish, I think, is the guy on the outside that is really going to separate things. Keenan Garber on the other side of things. They have a really good kind of base of players. It's not necessarily anything that is going to smack you over the head other than Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards. They're going to be a problem, but overall I think they have enough flash, and then they have the foundation to build around that is going to make them really dangerous. And then Iowa State I think is going to have plenty to say this year, but I think it's more because of the experience that they have on their team. I think Rocco Becht coming back as the starter is absolutely huge. You have Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. I wrote Jaden Noel down here. Jaden Higgins that absolutely are going to be incredible on the outside and be essentially impossible to stop. You know, you can stifle them just a little bit, but I don't think you're going to stop both these guys on an afternoon. Iowa State returns 90% of its production from the offensive side of the ball, second most in the country, and 80% on the defensive side of the ball, fifth most in the country. So this is a team that doesn't really change that much from last year, and that's usually when you see Matt Campbell really make some noise. So I really like both these teams. I expect them to be facing off in Arlington at the end of the year. I have Utah barely missing out because of some tiebreakers and things of that nature. I do think it's going to be a really good team. I do worry a little bit about Cam Rising, but overall, I never really pick with injuries in mind. So I do think these Utah teams are going to have plenty to say. I just think they won't get to Arlington in their very first year. Arizona, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, and Kansas are going to be right there. They are all really, really good teams that are going to have plenty to say in this conference, and I think all of them have different strengths, and they're all going to fight each other in different ways, and it's going to create a little bit of a problem for some of these teams. I'll put it that way, but UCF is a team that I know a lot of people are really, really high on. I like them. I do think they're a really good team and someone that is building something special in Orlando, but overall, don't necessarily think they're going to make the crazy amount of noise that some people think this year. Colorado, TCU, and Texas Tech are right in that same area. I can't necessarily break down, who is the better team among the bunch. I am going to take Colorado to finish above them because they got Shedeur Sanders. I'll be plain and simple. That is the guy that I think is the best quarterback in this conference, and when you have him, you have plenty of things. And frankly, that 6-6 could very easily turn into a 9-3 depending on how that offensive line plays. But that's obviously something we'll break down as the season goes on. Houston and Baylor are kind of in the same boat. I think they're going to make enough noise with the quarterbacks they have there, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be anything overly special. And then BYU, Arizona State, and Cincinnati are just fighting uphill battles this year. I think it's going to be really tough years for all of those programs, and it'll be interesting to see how they kind of develop over the next couple of years in the Big 12, but I do think 2024 is going to be a rather tough year. But let's get into some postseason awards, and I do have Kansas State winning the whole thing. I think this team is just a little bit different than every other team in the conference. I think those three guys in the backfield are just going to be insanely hard to get a beat on. They're going to be able to play multiple running back sets, which is my favorite set in the entirety of college football. When you can have two running backs on the field, I think it makes you so much more multiple, especially when one of those guys is Dylan Edwards. Excuse me, lost my words there, but when Dylan Edwards is on the field, he adds a dynamic to this offense that hasn't been there in the past, and frankly, they very much need going forward. So I think they're going to absolutely utilize him in a number of different ways, whether it's, having two running backs in the backfield with Avery Johnson in the middle, splitting Dylan Edwards out as a wide receiver while you have DJ Giddens in the backfield, whatever that looks like. Kansas State is going to have so many different ways to attack you that I think they're going to be a team that's just going to be really hard to beat, especially when they're playing elite football and especially when they're running the offense at the clip that I expect them to run it, and with the guy that I expect them to really, really run it very well with, which is Avery Johnson. And then Avery Johnson I do have as the Offensive Player of the Year. I think it's going to be really hard to stop this kid, just plain and simple. I think he can make pretty much every single play you want on the football field. The passing does need to take a step forward in terms of completion percentage and things of that nature, but when you look at the receiving core that he has between J.C. Brown, who is going to be the go-to guy, Dante Cephas coming over from Penn State after a little bit of a down year, but still a very talented kid, and then Keegan Johnson is just a very professional receiver, just always that third down guy that you can go to with very sure hands. You don't necessarily have to worry about him too much. So I do think he'll take enough of a step forward there to make some noise through the air, and then on the ground is where the money is going to be made. On the ground is where everyone's going to be watching very closely. That mesh spot in a read option is going to be a nightmare for every D end or linebacker that is trying to play it, because you don't want either of those guys to have the ball. Regardless of it's DJ Giddens or Dylan Edwards at that mesh point with Avery Johnson, you don't want any of them. You don't want either of those guys with the ball in their hands, and both those guys are super dangerous regardless of where they go. So overall, I think that's going to be where Kansas State just makes it really tough on these defenses. You can play as many good defenses as you want. There's not really a defense that combats what Avery Johnson can do on the ground. So overall, I think that's the biggest difference maker here is Avery Johnson has a number of people around him that are going to take up all the defense's attention, and then he's going to be an absolute problem for them pretty much every which way from Tuesday. And then Jaden Higgins is a wide receiver at Iowa State that I think is going to be an absolute monster this year, someone that I think could be in that kind of fight for Offensive Player of the Year. For Defensive Player of the Year, this is a little bit more of a projection than anything else, but a very talented kid. Logan Fano is someone that I absolutely love. I think he's going to be a problem for pretty much every offensive tackle that you put in front of him. It is a bit of a projection, obviously. He played only 5 games a year ago, but had 3.5 sacks through 5 games, and that's really remarkable, especially for a kid that was as young as he was a year ago. I think he's just going to be an absolute problem. He's someone that is a year older now, more comfortable in this defense, and is going to be a starter for this team, and is just going to be a problem on the outside. I think when you look at Utah's defense, there's going to be plenty of ability on the back end of that defense led by Teo Johnson that you're going to have plenty of time to get to the quarterback as well. You're not necessarily going to have guys that can beat with every single move and beat them right away to get to the quarterback. You're going to have a little bit of time to develop, and frankly, when you have 6'5", 235 leaning on you, it's not going to be easy to hold up, and especially with that guy's speed off the edge, he's going to be an absolute problem. So overall, I think when you look at the best defensive player in this conference, I'd have a tough time saying it's not Travis Hunter, but at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to win enough games to be in this conversation. And then Colin Oliver is another one, a linebacker at Oklahoma State that I think is going to have plenty to say about this defensive season in the Big 12. Freshman of the year, I have yet another wide receiver. I've gone through 4 conferences. I picked 4 wide receivers as my freshman of the year, and frankly, it just goes to show you how special this group is. I think Micah Hudson is someone that is going to put together a really good season for Texas Tech, and it was a reason that they brought in, there was only 2 5-stars that were brought into the Big 12 this past year, and it was him and Jordan Seaton over at Colorado. So this kid's going to be special. There's no two ways about that. I could put Jordan Seaton here, but when we talk about these awards, they like to look at stats. They like to look at, receptions, receiving yards, that type of thing. And frankly, I think Micah Hudson might just be leading Texas Tech in receiving yards at the end of the year. So I think he's going to be an absolute monster. Jerlon Miller is another guy, wide receiver at Colorado, that I think is going to have plenty to say here, and definitely a really, really talented player for them. And then the transfer of the year, I think it's going to be Dylan Edwards. This one, honestly, was not too tough for me. The second that he transferred, I knew this team was just a little bit different. I knew it opened so many doors in the run game, in the pass game. It made the job so much easier for Avery Johnson, which is huge in the pass game. So overall, I think you look at this team and you add someone like Dylan Edwards to a group that is already ridiculously athletic and really hard to get on the ground. it's going to be impossible to get a beat on what this offense is going to do this year. And I think Dylan Edwards is going to be at the center of a lot of it. Whether you want to put him on the outside and motion him in, or play him at running back and motion him out, or you can play around with a million different formations with this kid, because he's one of those athletes that is just downright special. And then Dorian Singer, a wide receiver from Utah, I think is going to be huge for them this upcoming year, and definitely have plenty to say about what they do this upcoming year. But overall, I do think Kansas State is going to be that team that separates. I think they're going to be that team that just makes life incredibly hard for every defense that they play, and I think they have enough guys on the back end of that of their defense with Jacob Parrish and Keenan Garber that I think they're going to make enough plays. They don't necessarily have to be spectacular on defense. I think they're going to be more than fine, but I think they just have to get the ball where it belongs, which is in the offense's hand, let them work, and let them do what is going to make them special, which is run the ball. So I do think Kansas State's going to be one of those teams that maybe it's, pretty monotonous wins at times. Maybe it's running the ball, maybe it's playing solid defense, but at the end of the day, when you have someone like Avery Johnson in the backfield, they're going to make those plays that are going to make your jaw drop. And they're going to make plays that are going to make defenses jaw drop, and then it's going to be really, really hard to deal with them. So overall, when I look at this conference, there are a ton of teams that have a ton going for them. There are so many different teams that have a ton of experience, have a ton of players coming back from, injuries like Cam Rising. There are so many different teams that are going to have, a shot to win this thing. But when I look at the team that has the biggest difference maker on their team, the guy that I think is going to make the most noise this year in this conference, I pick Avery Johnson at 10 times out of 10. So I do think Avery Johnson and the Kansas State Wildcats lift the trophy at the end of the year in Arlington, and it'll be really fun to watch that when it does happen. But I do think they're going to have to go through Iowa State to do it. But let's take our third break here. When we come back, we're going to break down some of the programs that are just starting to click. Everything's starting to go their way, and they're really, really dangerous programs when that happens. So we'll break down those 5 programs I have for you right after this, so stick with us.